I never thought the people I loved most would be the ones who made me feel invisible. For years, I stayed quiet, gave everything, and asked for nothing in return. But one night, I overheard words that shattered every illusion I had about family, respect, and my place in their lives. They saw me as weak, disposable, a burden. What they did not know was how much power I truly held, or how close they were to losing everything they took for granted. That moment changed me, and once the truth came out, nothing was ever the same again. Before we dive into today's story, take a moment to share where you're watching from. We love seeing how our stories bring people together from every corner of the world. Your thoughts and comments are what make this community so special, and we're truly grateful to have you here. If you haven't already, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss a new story filled with drama, resilience, and unexpected twists. Now, settle in, get comfortable, and maybe grab your favorite drink because this is a tale you won't want to miss. Let's get started. My name is Evelyn Carter, and I am 58 years old. I have lived in Portland, Oregon, for most of my adult life, long enough to grow used to the gray skies and steady rain that seemed to match the quieter rhythm of my later years. On the surface, my life looks modest and unremarkable. I rent a small apartment on the east side of the city, drive a 10-year-old sedan, and keep my expenses simple. What most people do not know is that I earn more than $45,000 a month as a senior real estate investment consultant. I never felt the need to advertise it. Money, to me, has always been a tool, not an identity. After my husband passed away from a sudden stroke, work became my anchor. The silence in our house was unbearable at first. I filled the empty evenings with client calls, market reports, and long hours reviewing property portfolios. Staying busy kept the grief from swallowing me whole. Over time, my career became something I could control when so much else felt uncertain. The success came quietly, built on decades of discipline and careful decisions, not flashy risks or lucky breaks. Despite my income, I chose a simple lifestyle. My apartment is clean but modest, with neutral furniture and a few framed photos of my late husband and my son. I cook most of my meals at home and rarely buy anything extravagant. I have never believed that comfort needs to be loud. Peace, to me, is more valuable than luxury. My son, Ryan Carter, is 32 years old. He works in administrative management for a logistics company, a stable but not highly paid position. He has always been responsible, polite, and eager to avoid conflict. 3 years ago, he married Melissa. She is energetic, stylish, and deeply invested in how her life appears online. Her social media accounts are filled with carefully staged photos of brunches, designer clothes, and perfectly decorated spaces. Image matters to her. Presentation matters. Reality, I would later learn, is more complicated. When Ryan and Melissa decided they wanted to buy a home, they set their hearts on Lake Oswego, one of the more expensive residential areas near Portland. The houses there were beautiful, surrounded by trees and quiet streets, but far beyond what Ryan's salary alone could support. He tried to convince me they had everything under control, but I knew the numbers. I also knew that my son wanted to feel independent. So I helped them quietly. I paid the full down payment myself. I put the house in my name to protect the investment, and I set up automatic payments to cover the monthly mortgage. Ryan and Melissa believed I had contributed only a small portion from my retirement savings. I never corrected them. I did not want money to change the way my son saw me or the way he saw himself. I wanted him to feel like the provider, not the recipient of charity. Every Sunday, I drove out to Lake Oswego with homemade food, fresh fruit, or flowers for their table. At first, the visits felt warm. We talked about work, small plans for the future, and the simple details of life. Over time, the atmosphere shifted. Melissa became more distracted, more distant. Her attention stayed on her phone. Conversations grew shorter. Ryan still smiled, but something felt different. I told myself it was just a generational gap. Younger people lived faster, louder lives. They valued different things. I tried not to take the subtle changes personally. After all, families evolve. Children grow up. Parents step back. Still, there was a quiet ache in realizing that I was no longer central in my son's life. I never imagined that my silence about money, meant to preserve peace, would eventually be used to measure my worth. At that point, I believed I was simply a supportive mother, enjoying her role from the sidelines, unaware that I was already being misunderstood. If you're still watching and curious about what happens next, please comment number 1 below to let me know you're with me. Now, let's move on to the first warning sign. The Sunday dinners slowly began to feel different, though I could not pinpoint exactly when the change started. At first, I told myself it was nothing more than routine fatigue. Ryan worked long hours, and Melissa always seemed busy with her social life, her phone, and her endless stream of online posts. Still, the warmth that once filled their dining room was fading, replaced by a quiet tension I could not ignore. Melissa no longer asked about my week or my work. She barely made eye contact, often scrolling through her phone while I spoke. When I tried to share small stories from my past or memories of Ryan's childhood, she responded with short, distracted comments. Her smile felt forced, her politeness thin. Ryan remained courteous, but he seemed tired, withdrawn, as if he were carrying a weight he could not explain. One afternoon, I arrived earlier than usual with a basket of fresh bread and fruit. The front door was slightly open, and I could hear Melissa's voice from inside. I paused, not wanting to interrupt. Her tone was sharp, almost irritated, as if she were venting to someone she trusted. I did not mean to listen, but her words stopped me in place. She was talking about me? Her voice carried a note of contempt I had never heard before. She described me as a woman who relied too much on her son, someone who did not contribute anything, and acted like a burden. She laughed as she spoke, suggesting that I lived off Ryan's success and had nothing of my own. The words felt like cold water against my skin. I stood there, my hands still wrapped around the doorframe, unable to move. What hurt most was not just her tone, but the confidence behind it. Melissa truly believed what she was saying. Ryan was in the room with her. I could hear him shifting nearby, but he did not correct her. He did not defend me. His silence echoed louder than any insult. In that moment, I felt something inside me crack. I had spent my life protecting my son, supporting him quietly, asking for nothing in return. Yet here I was, reduced to a stereotype in my own family. I waited until Melissa ended the call before stepping inside. My face remained calm, my posture steady. Neither of them mentioned what had just happened. The dinner that followed was awkward, filled with small talk and long pauses. Melissa behaved as though nothing was wrong, while Ryan avoided my eyes. I ate politely, thanked them for the meal, and left earlier than usual. That night, I sat alone in my apartment, replaying her words over and over in my mind. I wondered how she had come to see me that way. Had I been too quiet about my own life? Had my modest lifestyle created an image of weakness? Or had I simply outgrown my place in their world? I had never asked for recognition. I did not need praise or gratitude, but respect mattered to me. Being dismissed, especially by someone who had benefited from my support, cut deeper than I expected. Over the next few weeks, the distance only grew. Melissa spoke less to me. Ryan remained polite, but emotionally distant. Their home no longer felt welcoming. I began to sense that my presence was tolerated rather than appreciated. I started to reflect on my choices. I had hidden my success to protect my relationship with my son. I had stayed silent to avoid creating pressure or resentment. But silence, I realized, can be misunderstood. It can be mistaken for weakness. Something in the foundation of our family dynamic had shifted, and I could feel it in every quiet dinner, every avoided conversation, every forced smile. I did not yet know how serious the situation would become, but I understood one thing clearly. The woman Melissa believed me to be was not the woman I truly was. And soon, that misunderstanding would have consequences far greater than any of us expected. If you're still watching and starting to feel the tension, please comment number 2 below to let me know you're with me. Now, let me show you how things began to fall apart. Melissa's birthday party was held at the house in Lake Oswego, the same house I had quietly helped secure for them 3 years earlier. The driveway was full of unfamiliar cars, and laughter drifted out through the open windows. Inside, the living room had been transformed into something that looked more like a magazine spread than a family space. String lights glowed softly, catered food covered the counters, and Melissa's friends filled the room with loud conversation and polished appearances. I arrived with a simple gift and a bouquet of fresh flowers. I did not expect special attention, but I did expect basic courtesy. Instead, Melissa guided me to a small table near the edge of the room, far from where she and her friends were gathered. She did not introduce me properly, only gesturing briefly in my direction before returning to her conversations. Ryan noticed but said nothing, choosing to stay near his wife. From my seat, I watched the party unfold. Melissa laughed freely, moving from group to group, soaking in the attention. Her friends admired the house, the decorations, and the effortless image she projected. I sat quietly, sipping my drink, feeling more like a guest in a stranger's home than a mother visiting her son. At one point, Melissa made a comment that was meant to sound playful. She said that people should know their place, especially when they were no longer the center of attention. A few of her friends laughed, but the words landed differently for me. I felt the subtle sting of being dismissed, reduced to a background presence in a space that I had helped create. I kept my expression calm, refusing to let anyone see the hurt beneath my composed exterior. As the evening continued, I excused myself to the kitchen to get some water. The noise from the party faded slightly, replaced by the quiet hum of the refrigerator and the soft glow of the overhead light. That was when I noticed a stack of papers on the counter. At first, I thought they were just bills or party receipts, but the letterhead caught my eye. They were bank documents. Curiosity turned into concern as I scanned the pages. The paperwork referenced a loan, one that was secured using the Lake Oswego property as collateral. My heart tightened. The house was in my name. Any financial decision involving it should have gone through me. Yet here were documents suggesting otherwise. As I read further, it became clear that Melissa had taken out the loan for a business venture. There was no mention of my authorization, and Ryan's name did not appear on the paperwork either. The amount was significant, large enough to put the property at risk if anything went wrong. I felt a rush of disbelief, followed by a deep, steady anger. This was not about money. I could absorb financial losses if necessary. What disturbed me was the complete lack of respect. The house I had protected, the stability I had provided, was being used without my knowledge, without my consent, and without any regard for the consequences. I thought about Ryan, about how hard he worked, how much he valued responsibility. He had no idea what was happening behind his back. Melissa's decision did not just affect me. It put my son in a vulnerable position, one he never agreed to. I returned the papers to their place and left the kitchen without saying a word. The party continued as if nothing had changed. Melissa smiled, Ryan laughed, and the guests carried on. No one noticed the shift that had just occurred inside me. On the drive home, the city lights blurred through my windshield. My thoughts were sharp and focused. For the first time, I felt like more than my feelings were at stake. My financial security, my legal standing, and my dignity were all being challenged. I realized then that silence was no longer an option. If I wanted to protect what I had built, and if I wanted to protect my son from decisions he did not even know about, I needed to take control of the situation. This was not the end of the conflict. It was only the beginning. If you're still watching and wondering how deep this situation goes, please comment number 3 below to let me know you're with me. Now, let's talk about the legal shock that changed everything. The drive home from Lake Oswego was quiet, but my thoughts were anything but. I did not cry. I did not feel overwhelmed. Instead, a strange calm settled over me, the kind that comes when emotions give way to clarity. What had happened at the party was no longer just about hurt feelings or family tension. It was about legal responsibility, financial security, and the protection of everything I had worked for. More than anything, I was worried about Ryan. My son had no idea that his wife had taken out a loan using the house as collateral. He believed their finances were stable. He believed their future was secure. The realization that he was being kept in the dark, possibly placed in a vulnerable position without his consent, stirred something protective inside me. I had always tried to step back and let him live his own life, but this situation demanded action. The next morning, I called a real estate attorney in Multnomah County, someone I had worked with in the past on complex property cases. I did not tell Ryan or Melissa what I was doing. This was not about confrontation. It was about understanding my position and protecting myself before anything else could go wrong. At the law office, the atmosphere was professional and calm. I explained what I had seen at the party and my concerns about the loan. The attorney reviewed the property records and confirmed what I already knew. The house was legally mine. Any financial agreement involving it required my signature. Without it, the loan documents held no legal weight against me. That information brought some relief, but it did not erase the deeper issue. The attorney also pulled up Melissa's financial history. She had taken out several small loans in the past, most of them related to short-term business ideas that never seemed to last. There was a pattern of risk, ambition without stability. None of these records showed Ryan's involvement. Hearing this confirmed what I feared most. My son was not part of these decisions. He was being shielded from the truth, or perhaps deliberately excluded from it. Either way, he was the one who would suffer if things collapsed. The attorney advised me to update the property records at the county office, creating a clear and recent legal marker of ownership. It was a simple step, but an important one. It would protect my rights and prevent any future confusion or misrepresentation. I followed that advice immediately. At the county office, the process was straightforward. Forms were filed, records were updated, and my name was clearly reaffirmed as the sole owner of the Lake Oswego house. As I signed the documents, I felt a quiet shift within myself. For years, I had prioritized keeping peace over asserting boundaries. Now, I was choosing security over silence. Still, I did not confront Ryan or Melissa. Not yet. I needed facts, not assumptions. I needed to understand the full picture before allowing emotions to drive the conversation. Acting too quickly could have caused unnecessary conflict, and I wanted any discussion to be grounded in truth, not impulse. On the way home, I reflected on how much had changed in such a short time. I was no longer just a supportive mother standing in the background. I was a woman who needed to protect her own stability, her dignity, and her future. This situation had revealed more than financial risk. It had exposed a shift in how I was perceived within my own family. The quiet respect I once felt had been replaced with assumptions, misunderstandings, and disregard. I did not feel angry. I felt focused. Sooner or later, Ryan and Melissa would notice the changes in the property records. When that moment came, there would be questions, reactions, and difficult conversations. I could not control how they would respond, but I could control how prepared I was. The first step was taken. The next would not be nearly as calm. If you're still watching and ready for the truth to come out, please comment number 4 below to let me know you're with me. Now, let's move into the moment everything exploded. The confrontation came sooner than I expected. One afternoon, as I was finishing some paperwork at home, my doorbell rang with a sharp urgency. When I opened the door, Melissa was standing there, her expression tight with anger. Ryan stood slightly behind her, confused and tense. Melissa had discovered the updated property records. She had seen my name clearly listed as the legal owner of the Lake Oswego house, and she felt exposed, cornered, and furious. She did not wait for an invitation. She stepped inside and began speaking in a raised accusatory tone, demanding to know why my name was on the house. Her words came fast, loaded with resentment. She insisted the home belonged to her and Ryan, that I had no right to interfere, and that I was trying to control their lives. Ryan looked lost. His eyes moved between us, searching for context he did not have. I remained calm. Years of negotiation in high-pressure environments had taught me how to stay composed when emotions ran high. I asked them to sit down, not because I felt obligated to justify myself, but because the truth deserved to be delivered without chaos. Melissa continued to speak over me, referring to me in dismissive terms and accusing me of manipulation. The insults were less painful than they were revealing. What hurt most was not the volume of her anger, but the certainty behind it. She truly believed I was powerless, dependent, and irrelevant. When I finally spoke, I did not raise my voice. I did not argue. I simply stated the facts. I told them about my career, about my income, about the decades I had spent building financial stability after my husband's death. I explained that the house was legally mine, that I had paid the down payment and covered the mortgage, and that my decision to remain quiet had been made out of love, not control. Ryan's reaction was immediate. The color drained from his face. He sat back in his chair, stunned, as if the foundation of his understanding had just collapsed. He had never imagined that his mother had such financial independence. He had never questioned the quiet way I lived. Melissa's anger shifted direction. Instead of acknowledging the truth, she redirected her frustration toward me. She accused me of hiding information, of pulling strings behind the scenes, of trying to keep Ryan dependent on me. Her narrative painted herself as the victim and me as the manipulator. I listened without interruption. Inside, I felt something settle. The confusion I had carried for months was finally replaced with clarity. This was not a misunderstanding. This was a pattern of assumption, entitlement, and disrespect. Ryan did not defend Melissa's words, but he did not challenge them either. He seemed frozen, overwhelmed by the sudden collapse of the story he had been living in. I saw the conflict in his eyes, the struggle between loyalty and realization. The room fell silent. There were no raised voices anymore, only the heavy presence of truth. My apartment, usually a place of calm, felt charged with unresolved emotion. Nothing had been resolved, but everything had been revealed. I realized then that no amount of explanation could repair what had been broken. Respect cannot be demanded. It must be chosen. Melissa eventually left, still angry, still convinced that I was the obstacle in her life. Ryan followed her, not because he agreed, but because he did not yet know how to stand on his own. As the door closed behind them, I remained where I was, steady and grounded. For the first time, I was not afraid of losing approval. I was no longer trying to protect an illusion of harmony. I was protecting myself. The next phase would require a decision, not from emotion, but from strength. After Ryan and Melissa left my apartment, the silence felt heavier than usual. I sat alone at my kitchen table, staring at the surface where their coffee cups had rested only minutes earlier. There was no anger in me anymore. The confrontation had stripped that away. What remained was clarity. For the first time, I saw my situation without emotion clouding my judgment. Later that evening, Ryan called. His voice sounded tired, unsure, as if he were still trying to process everything he had learned. He asked me to reconsider the legal steps I had taken, explaining that he only wanted peace in his family. He spoke about stress, pressure, and the desire to move forward without conflict. I listened carefully, but I did not interrupt. His words were gentle, yet they avoided the real issue. Shortly after, a message arrived from Melissa. It was brief and carefully worded. She expressed regret for how things had unfolded and reminded me that family should matter more than money. There was no acknowledgement of the insults, no recognition of the boundaries she had crossed. The apology felt more like a strategic move than a sincere one. I realized something important in that moment. Neither of them was responding to the hurt they had caused. They were responding to the consequences. I thought back to the birthday party, to the dismissive comment about knowing one's place. I remembered standing in the hallway listening to Melissa describe me as a burden while Ryan stayed silent. Those moments had not been misunderstandings. They had been reflections of how I was viewed. For years, I had chosen quiet support over visible presence. I had believed that staying in the background would preserve harmony. But silence, I now understood, can also invite disregard. Protecting my financial interests was only part of the decision I had made. The larger issue was self-respect. I responded to Ryan calmly. I explained that this was not about punishing anyone or creating division. It was about setting boundaries that should have existed long ago. Respect, I told him, was not optional. It was the foundation of any healthy relationship, including family. He sounded disappointed, but there was a subtle shift in his tone. He began to understand that this was not just a disagreement over property. It was about how I had been treated. That night, I slept peacefully for the first time in weeks. The following days were quiet. There were no visits, no invitations, no Sunday dinners. The distance between us was uncomfortable, but it was also honest. For once, we were not pretending that everything was fine when it was not. I spent my time focusing on myself. I returned to my work routine, handled client calls, and took long evening walks through my neighborhood. With each passing day, I felt more grounded in my decision. I was no longer operating from fear of losing my son's approval. I was operating from a place of strength. Deep down, I knew this choice would have consequences. Families do not change overnight. Boundaries often create discomfort before they create understanding. But growth rarely comes without resistance. Ryan and Melissa were being forced to confront realities they had avoided. Financial transparency, personal accountability, the difference between entitlement and appreciation. And I was being forced to confront my own patterns. My habit of staying quiet, my tendency to protect others at the expense of myself. This chapter of my life was not about reclaiming a house. It was about reclaiming my voice. Whatever happened next, I was prepared to face it with dignity. The choice had been made, and there was no turning back. If you're still watching and want to see the consequences of these choices, please comment number 6 below to let me know you're with me. Now, let's move on to chapter 7. The days that followed my decision were quiet, but the silence carried weight. There were no Sunday dinners, no casual phone calls, no polite check-ins. What once felt like distance now felt like separation. Still, I held my ground. I had chosen clarity over comfort, and I knew that choice would not come without consequences. Ryan began to uncover the truth on his own. He reviewed their shared financial records and discovered just how much Melissa had been hiding. The total debt was far greater than he had imagined, more than $60,000 spread across multiple accounts. Many of the charges were vague, tied to short-lived business ideas and personal spending that had never been discussed openly. The realization shook him. Trust, once assumed, now felt fragile. Melissa responded defensively when confronted. Instead of taking responsibility, she redirected her frustration toward me. In her version of events, I was the source of every problem, the reason their life felt unstable, the obstacle standing between them and the future she believed she deserved. Accountability was not something she was ready to accept. Ryan, caught between loyalty and truth, began to feel the emotional toll. He had always tried to avoid conflict, but avoidance no longer worked. The gap between what he believed and what he was learning grew wider each day. The pressure of financial uncertainty combined with emotional strain began to wear him down. From my side, I stayed distant. Not because I did not care, but because I had learned that stepping in too quickly only delayed necessary growth. My role was no longer to fix problems silently. It was to allow reality to speak for itself. Still, I worried. No matter how strong my resolve, I was a mother. Watching my son struggle was not easy. I wanted to protect him, to offer solutions, to ease the tension he carried. But I also knew that shielding him from the truth would only repeat the same cycle. Ryan started to reflect on his own behavior. He remembered the moments he had stayed silent when Melissa dismissed me. He thought about how easily he had accepted her version of reality without asking deeper questions. For the first time, he recognized that silence was not neutrality. It was a choice, and it had consequences. The home they shared no longer felt like a place of peace. Arguments became frequent. Conversations felt strained. The emotional distance between them grew as financial secrets continued to surface. What once looked like a polished, stable life now revealed cracks beneath the surface. Meanwhile, my own routine remained steady. I focused on work, stayed active in my community, and spent time reflecting on what truly mattered to me. The absence of family gatherings was noticeable, but the emotional clarity I gained was something I had not felt in years. I was no longer walking on eggshells. I no longer questioned my worth. What hurt the most was not the conflict itself, but the realization that respect had to be taught through boundaries, not sacrifice. Love alone was not enough to sustain healthy relationships. Ryan eventually began to see that the issues in his marriage were deeper than financial stress. They were rooted in communication, transparency, and shared responsibility. The pressure he felt was not caused by my actions, but by years of unresolved choices. He reached a point where he could no longer ignore what he was feeling. The emotional exhaustion forced him to confront his reality, not just as a husband, but as a son and as an individual. For the first time in a long while, he began to think about what kind of life he truly wanted, and for the first time, I allowed myself to believe that my decision, though painful, was necessary. Because sometimes, growth does not come from comfort. It comes from consequences. After watching the tension between Ryan and Melissa grow, I knew that staying completely distant was no longer the right approach. Silence had allowed the situation to reveal itself, but now it was time for direction. Not control, not rescue, just a clear path forward. The first decision I made was about the house in Lake Oswego. What once symbolized stability had become a source of risk and resentment. Melissa's unauthorized loan had exposed how vulnerable the situation truly was. I could no longer trust that my investment, or my intentions would be respected there. Selling the house was not an emotional choice, it was a practical one. I arranged for the property to be listed and handled the process professionally, just as I had done with countless other investments throughout my career. The goal was not to punish anyone, it was to close a chapter that had become unhealthy for everyone involved. Next, I focused on Ryan. I purchased a smaller condominium in a quieter part of Portland, one that matched his actual financial reality. Instead of gifting it to him, I offered it as a rental. This was important to me. I wanted my son to feel independent, not indebted. The rent was fair, manageable, and realistic. It gave him stability without creating dependence. Melissa, however, would no longer be shielded from the consequences of her choices. Her debts were her responsibility. I made it clear that I would not intervene financially or legally on her behalf. Support without accountability only enables harmful patterns, and I had learned that lesson the hard way. For Ryan, my conditions went beyond money. I asked him to commit to therapy, not because he was broken, but because he had spent too long avoiding conflict, prioritizing peace over truth. I wanted him to learn how to express boundaries, how to speak up, and how to protect himself emotionally. He agreed, not with resistance, but with quiet understanding. That response told me more than words ever could. The relationship between Ryan and Melissa continued to strain under the weight of honesty. Without financial illusions or silent support, the reality of their dynamic became impossible to ignore. Their conversations grew more serious, their disagreements more revealing. From my side, I maintained a respectful distance. I did not interfere. I did not offer unsolicited advice. I simply remained present when needed and silent when not. For the first time, our relationship felt balanced. Ryan began to see me not as a safety net, but as a person with her own life, boundaries, and values. That shift was subtle, but powerful. Melissa, on the other hand, struggled with the loss of control. Without easy access to support or validation, her frustration became more visible. The confidence she once projected began to crack under the weight of responsibility. And for me, something unexpected happened. I stopped feeling guilty. I no longer questioned whether I was doing enough or giving enough. I had given years of quiet support. What I was offering now was something different: clarity, structure, stability built on respect, not obligation. My life outside of family matters also began to expand. I spent more time with colleagues, joined a local walking group, and reconnected with parts of myself that had been set aside for too long. I remembered what it felt like to live without constantly measuring my worth through what I provided for others. Helping my son did not require sacrificing myself. True support meant encouraging growth, even when it felt uncomfortable. As the weeks passed, the emotional chaos settled into something more grounded. Not perfect, not easy, but honest. The future was no longer built on silence or assumptions. It was built on truth. And that, I realized, was the strongest foundation of all. If you're still watching and ready to see how this story ends, please comment number 8 below to let me know you're with me. Now, let's move into the final outcome. When the quiet support disappeared, so did the illusion that everything in Ryan and Melissa's marriage was fine. Without financial cushioning or silent intervention, the pressure of responsibility became impossible to ignore. The debts Melissa had accumulated did not vanish. The expectations she carried about comfort and lifestyle did not fade either. What changed was her willingness to face them. She grew restless, impatient, and increasingly distant. The version of life she wanted no longer matched the reality she was living. Eventually, she chose to leave. There was no dramatic goodbye, no emotional closure. Just a practical decision to walk away from a situation that required accountability she was not prepared to accept. Ryan was left with the truth. For the first time, he had to confront his life without distractions or excuses. The marriage he believed could be fixed through silence had ended through avoidance. The future he imagined had dissolved into something quieter, more uncertain, but also more honest. He did not blame me. Instead, he began to reflect on himself. He realized how often he had chosen peace over clarity, how easily he had accepted narratives that required no effort to maintain. The hardest part was recognizing how his silence had affected the people who mattered most, including me. One evening, he came to my apartment alone. There was no tension in his posture, no defensiveness in his voice. He did not ask for help or forgiveness. He simply acknowledged the truth. He admitted that he should have defended me when I was dismissed. He admitted that he had been afraid of conflict and had allowed that fear to shape his choices. His apology was not dramatic, but it was sincere. I listened. Not as someone waiting for an explanation, but as a mother who wanted to see her son grow. We talked about boundaries, respect, and the difference between loyalty and avoidance. There was no need for raised voices or emotional appeals. The conversation felt mature, grounded, and real. Our relationship shifted in that moment. We were no longer operating from obligation or habit. We were connecting through mutual understanding. As Ryan continued therapy, he learned how to communicate more clearly and take responsibility for his own emotional health. The changes were subtle at first, but they were consistent. He became more confident, more honest, and more present in his own life. Meanwhile, my world began to expand in ways I had not allowed before. With the fewer family demands, I rediscovered the rhythm of my own days. I joined a local walking group, took weekend trips along the Oregon coast, and spent more time nurturing friendships that had long existed in the background. I explored interests I had set aside for years, not out of necessity, but out of choice. For the first time in a long while, my life felt centered around me. There was no bitterness toward Melissa. Holding on to resentment would only keep me tied to a chapter that had already closed. What remained was perspective. I understood now that respect cannot be assumed, and love cannot thrive without accountability. Our family dynamic was not perfect, but it was balanced. There were no false smiles or forced gatherings. There was honesty, space, and a shared understanding that growth requires discomfort. As I looked back on everything that had happened, I saw more than conflict. I saw transformation, not just in Ryan, but in myself. I was no longer the woman who stayed quiet to keep the peace. I was the woman who chose clarity, strength, and self-respect, and that choice changed everything. Looking back, I barely recognized the woman I used to be. For years, I believed that love meant staying quiet, that being supportive meant staying invisible. I thought that if I asked for nothing, I would keep the peace. What I learned instead is that silence does not protect relationships. It only hides the truth. My worth was never tied to how much I gave or how much I sacrificed. It was tied to how I allowed myself to be treated. When respect disappears, no amount of love can replace it. I had to learn that lesson the hard way. Setting boundaries did not destroy my family. It saved what could be saved. It forced honesty where there had been avoidance and responsibility where there had been excuses. Healthy relationships are not built on obligation. They are built on mutual respect, transparency, and the courage to speak up when something feels wrong. I also learned that family is more than shared blood. Family is how we show up for one another. It is how we listen. It is how we take responsibility for our actions. Real connection does not come from comfort. It comes from growth. As a woman in my late 50s, I finally allowed myself to live for more than just my role as a mother. I reconnected with my own interests, my friendships, and my sense of independence. I stopped measuring my value through what I provided for others and started honoring who I was as an individual. There is no regret in my choices. Every difficult moment taught me something essential. Strength does not come from controlling situations. It comes from standing firm in your values, even when it feels uncomfortable. If there is one message I would share with anyone listening to my story, it is this: never let anyone define your worth for you. Not your partner, not your children, not your circumstances. Respect is not something you earn by staying quiet. It is something you protect by standing tall. Life does not end when you set boundaries. It begins again, clearer, stronger, and more honest than before. My story did not end with loss. It ended with clarity. Life has a way of revealing who we are when comfort fades and truth takes its place. Sometimes, the most difficult moments are not meant to break us, but to teach us how to stand taller, speak clearer, and protect our own worth. Growth does not come from silence. It comes from honesty, courage, and the willingness to choose self-respect over approval. Every ending carries a lesson. Not all relationships are meant to stay the same, but every experience can shape us into stronger, wiser versions of ourselves. When we learn to set boundaries, we do not lose love. We create space for healthier, more meaningful connections to exist. Thank you for taking the time to listen to this story. If it moved you, inspired you, or reminded you of your own journey, feel free to share your thoughts in the comments. Your voice matters. And if you would like to hear more stories like this, don't forget to like, subscribe, and stay connected.